You know, sweethearts, people always think stories like mine end with forgiveness, with healing, with some neat little bow wrapped around years of aching silence. That's what they want, a tidy ending, a warm moral, something they can tuck away with a sigh and a smile. But not every wound gets that luxury. Some wounds linger, soft and pulsing just beneath the skin. You carry them through seasons, through milestones, through generations. You learn to smile through them. You learn to stir soup with one hand and hold your heart together with the other. And that hallway, that narrow strip of carpet just outside the dining room, it was nothing special, really, the kind with peeling baseboards and one loose floorboard that always creaked under your heel. But that day, it became the whole world to me because, while they sat around that table laughing, serving, toasting, passing the butter like nothing was wrong, I stood just outside, my shadow on the wall, my breath caught in my chest, forgotten, uninvited. It wasn't dramatic. No yelling, no slammed doors, no big betrayal to make it easy for me to turn away and say, "That's why." No, sweethearts, the most painful part was the quiet, the way no one noticed I wasn't there. The way my chair was never set at all. Over time, you get used to that feeling, don't you? Being needed, but not wanted. Remembered, but not included. Like a recipe passed down but never cooked again. I wasn't always someone who stood outside the doorway, watching others live. No. Once, I was the one who lit the candles, who tucked the napkins, who hummed old songs in the kitchen while the roast sizzled and the babies napped. I was the one who taught them to slice onions without crying, who stayed up late stitching costumes for school plays, who held their tiny hands through fevers and heartaches and growing pains. I gave them everything, and somehow, somewhere along the way, I became invisible. I became the coat on the back of the chair, the soft cough in the other room, the one who made the pie but wasn't offered a slice. And I suppose I could have walked in that day, sat down, claimed my place, but something inside me said, no. Something inside me had finally had enough. I stood in the hallway, sweethearts. I watched them raise glasses. I watched them laugh at jokes they never told me. I listened to my grandson tell a story I'd never heard. And I realized something sharp and cold that cut deeper than any cruelty ever could. They didn't forget me. They just didn't think I mattered enough to miss. Now, before I go on, before I take you further into this story I've carried like a stone beneath my ribs for decades, I want to ask you something. Do me a small kindness, will you? Like this video, subscribe if your heart tells you to, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I don't need applause. I don't want pity. But I do want this story, this truth, to ripple a little further. Because what happened in that hallway wasn't sudden, it was slow, quiet, 1,000 little moments that built into one terrible realization. And once I tell you, you'll understand why I've never stood in a doorway the same way again. You'll understand why the clink of silverware can still send a chill down my spine. Why Thanksgiving smells like absence. Why I no longer set the table, not even for myself. So sit close, sweethearts. Let the world go still. Let the kettle whistle and the clock tick softly on the wall. Because this story, it's not just about being left out. It's about the years that led to it, the silence that shaped it, and the truth I had to face. Alone. You wouldn't recognize the town now, sweethearts. They've paved over most of what we knew, turned the corner grocer into a real estate office, tore down the church to put up a parking lot, and there's a Subway where the barber used to be. But back then, oh, it was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked and neighbors borrowed sugar without asking. I grew up in a little, white clapboard house on the edge of Maple Lane. You could hear the crickets at night and smell the biscuits baking before dawn. My mama Lorraine was always up early, standing by the stove with her hair pinned up and her apron smudged with flour. She had strong hands and a soft voice, and she hummed old hymns under her breath while she cooked, leaning on the everlasting arms. And in the garden, to this day, those tunes take me right back to the smell of bacon grease and molasses. Daddy was a railroad man, gone more than he was home, but when he came through that door, he brought the cold scent of engine steel and diesel, and we all clung to him like ivy to brick. He had a laugh that rumbled from deep in his chest and boots that thudded across the floor like he was bringing the whole world with him. We didn't have much. Lord knows we didn't. But we didn't feel poor. We had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a backyard that felt like a kingdom. I shared a bed with my younger sister Clara until we were nearly grown. and we whispered stories to each other every night until sleep took us mid-sentence on Sundays. We wore our best dresses, usually hand-me-downs, or something Mama had sewn from old curtains, and walked to the little white chapel at the end of the road. I can still remember the cool feel of the pews, the scent of hymnals, the squeak of polished shoes on wooden floors. After church, we'd have pot roast if we were lucky, or fried potatoes and onion gravy if we weren't. Either way, it felt like a feast. We didn't go out to eat, never once, but we had backyard picnics with chipped plates and sweet tea in jelly jars. We had sun-warmed tomatoes from the garden, and peaches so ripe they stained our chins. Mama made vinegar slaw with shredded cabbage, and her cornbread could make a grown man weep. She used bacon drippings in everything, said it was her secret weapon. There was laughter, then real, bone-deep laughter. We'd sit on the porch and, the evenings, Daddy in his rocker, Mama knitting, and us girls catching fireflies in mason jars. I thought that porch would last forever. I thought we all would. Clara and I used to pretend the apple tree in the back was our house. She'd be the baby, and I'd be the mama, just like ours, fussing over imaginary soup and brushing her tangled curls. Funny, isn't it? How we play out our future without even knowing it. School was a mile down the road, and we walked in every weather, rain or shine, snow or dust. The building was old even then, with radiators that clanked and windows that stuck in summer, but I loved it. I loved the smell of chalk and paper and the neat lines of cursive scrawled across the board. I wasn't the smartest in the class, but I listened, I remembered. I paid attention to the spaces between people, the way someone's face changed before they cried. I think I always felt too much. That's the curse of women like me. We didn't talk about feelings back then, not like folks do now. If something hurt, you swept it under the rug and kept moving. That was the way. But there was comfort in the routine, in the rhythm of rising early, working hard, eating together, praying before bed. The days blurred, but the love, that held fast. I remember the first time a boy passed me a note. A little folded square, with "Do you like me?" and 2 boxers to check. I giggled for a whole week. I kept that note in a tin under my bed until I married, though I never married that boy. His name was Tommy something. He moved away during the summer, and never said goodbye. It's strange, the things you remember. The way the soap smelled in Mama's laundry, the exact sound of Daddy's whistle coming up the walkway, the sting of Clara's braids snapping against my arm when we fought, and the way we always made up by nightfall. Back then, life felt small, but safe, like a circle drawn and chalked in but whole. I didn't know the circle would break. I didn't know how much would change, but those were the days, when the table was always full, when no one stood in the hallway, when I believed, with all my heart, that I would always belong. I used to think the world stopped at the edge of Maple Lane, that if you went any farther than the county fairgrounds or the feed store, you'd fall right off the edge of the earth. We didn't travel, we didn't vacation. Our whole world was folded neatly into those few dusty streets, where every porch swing told a story and every dog knew your name. After I turned 16, Mama said I was ready to work outside the home. Not forever, she told me, brushing the hem of my skirt smooth. Just long enough to know what it means to stand on your own feet. And so I did. I got a job at the 5 and Dime on Main Street, sweeping aisles, restocking, sewing thread, and counting out change with trembling fingers. The store had creaky floors and a bell that rang when someone walked in. Sharp and tinny like a bird. My manager was Mr. Klein, an older man with thick eyebrows and a cigarette always pinched between his fingers. He was gruff, but fair. And in those slow hours after school, I learned how to fold linens just right, how to wrap a gift with brown paper and twine, and how to carry myself like a woman, not just a girl with good intentions. Sometimes I'd see Mama through the window, standing by the bus stop on Fridays. She'd wave and hold up a tin of her buttermilk cookies wrapped in wax paper. And though she never said it, I knew she was proud. Clara got married young, 18 and barefoot in our backyard with daisies in her hair and tears in her eyes. Her dress was borrowed, and her groom, Michael, was nervous as a colt. They didn't have much, but they were in love, and in those days, that was supposed to be enough. Me. I wasn't so quick to settle. I liked the way the world widened. When I walked through town in my work clothes, grown women calling me ma'am, little girls staring like I was someone they might become. I wasn't beautiful, but I was kind, and in a town like ours, kindness had weight. That's when I met Walter. He came in one Saturday afternoon, asking about a record player needle. Tall, quiet, with a jacket slung over one shoulder and shoes, too clean to be from around here. Said he was just passing through to help his uncle with a roof job. He smiled at me not just with his mouth, but with his whole face, like he saw something in me I didn't even know I had. He bought the needle, a spool of blue thread, and a cherry soda from the cooler. And when he left, I watched him go, until the bell over the door stopped ringing. Something in my chest fluttered like a curtain in the wind. He came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. By the fourth week, he wasn't pretending anymore. I don't even need anything, he said, leaning on the counter. Just wanted to see if you'd smile at me again. I did. We courted slow. There were church picnics and walks by the river, and long talks on the porch where our knees barely touched. He'd bring me little things, a button carved from bone, a rose pressed in a book, a lemon drop wrapped in tissue. You're a soft place in a hard world, he told me once, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Mama was hesitant. You don't know his people, she whispered one night, kneading dough with her sleeves rolled up and flour dusting her elbows from away. That can mean something, Gracie. But Daddy just watched us together and nodded. Let the girl follow her heart. It's strong. It won't lead her wrong. I believed that. I believed Daddy. I believed Walter asked me to marry him on the front steps of the store after closing. It was raining, not hard, just enough to wet the air and soften the world. He held out a small gold ring, nothing fancy, just a plain band with a scratch on one side. It's not new, he said, but it's full of promise. And I said, yes. The wedding was quiet, just family, some neighbors, and old Miss Dottie playing hymns on the upright piano. Clara stood beside me, her second baby already swelling beneath her dress, and Mama cried through the whole ceremony. Walter kissed me like I was made of something breakable and brave at the same time. Afterward, we moved into a small upstairs apartment above a bakery. The whole place smelled like yeast and cinnamon. I'd wake to the sound of kneading in ovens below, and fall asleep to the rustle of Walter's breath beside me. Warm and steady. We were poor, yes, but happy. I kept working part-time while Walter found a job in construction. We had chipped plates and mismatched towels, but we had laughter. We had long talks and midnight dances in the kitchen. We played cards by candlelight when the power went out and read books out loud on the fire escape when the summer air was too thick to breathe. It was all so simple, so full. I look back now, and I don't recognize myself, that young woman so sure that love, once found, could hold through anything. That belief was my inheritance, my blessing, my blind spot. Because no one tells you, sweethearts, how love can change shape, how it can drift, shrink, harden, how people you build your life around can start turning their chairs away from the table, one small inch at a time, until you're standing in the hallway, holding a pie they never asked for. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Back then, we was still new, and I still believed that love was enough. It didn't happen all at once. You hear people talk like there's always one big moment, one loud snap when everything falls apart. But in my case, it came like a slow leak. You don't even notice it at first. You just start sleeping a little lighter, laughing a little less. The first crack was so small I nearly stepped over it. It started with Walter's hours. Construction was feast or famine, and that year, it was famine. He'd come home late, shoulders sagging, boots thick with mud, his spirit a little quieter than usual. They're cutting back, he'd say, or job fell through, or giving all the overtime to his nephew. I believed him. Of course I did. We were married. He was my person. You don't question the rain when your roof starts leaking. You just find a bucket and wait for the sky to clear. I picked up more shifts at the 5 and dime. I did ironing for the pastor's wife in the evenings. I clipped coupons until my fingers were ink-stained. I stretched ground beef into 4 meals and learned how to make soup out of bones and hope. But it wasn't just the money. It was the way he started. Looking through me, he'd eat his dinner with the radio on too loud. He'd answer questions with half shrugs. I'd ask him how his day was, and he'd say, same, without meeting my eyes. And when I tried to press, he'd sigh and rub his face like I was the problem. I'm tired, Grace, he said one night, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. I'm just tired all the time. I nodded. I rubbed his back. I brought him tea with honey. That's what you do when someone you love starts dimming. You light your own candle and hold it close to them, hoping they'll catch the spark. But sometimes They daunt, then came the lies. Little ones. At first, he'd say he was going to the hardware store, but I'd find the receipt from a bar on 3rd Street. Or he'd tell me he was working a Saturday shift, but come home smelling like tobacco and perfume, faint, almost forgettable, if I hadn't been trained to notice. Still, I made excuses. He's stressed, I told myself. He's lost his footing. This will pass. But when the baby came, it didn't pass. It got worse. I was 24 when I gave birth to our first, a little girl with Walter's eyes and my grandmother's stubborn chin. We named her Evelyn Rose, and, for a little while, she became the sun everything else orbited around. She cried loud and slept light. And I was bone-tired but full in a way I'd never been before. Walter held her with caution, like she might shatter. He wasn't unkind, just distant. He'd rock her when I asked. He'd smile for pictures, but he never stayed in the room long. Said the crying gave him a headache. Said he'd be more help once she could walk. And so I carried her in my arms, on my hip, in my heart, while I cooked and cleaned and stitched clothes from old curtains. I learned how to breastfeed with one hand while flipping pancakes with the other. I learned how to soothe a fever, and how to stifle my tears so she'd never see me break. The second baby came quicker, a boy this time. James Matthew, gentle, wide-eyed, with little fingers that curled around mine like he never wanted to let go. By then, Walter had started disappearing for whole nights. He said he was working out of town. Said the job required long hauls and early starts. But he never looked me in the eye when he said it. And he didn't touch me the same. When he did, it felt more like habit than hunger. One night, after putting the children to bed, I found a matchbook in his jacket pocket from a place called Lou's. I'd never heard of it. When I asked him about it, he said, must have been someone else's coat. But I knew the smell of his cologne. I knew the shape of his lies. They were getting sloppy. I should have screamed. I should have thrown something. But instead, I just said, okay. Then I went to the kitchen and scrubbed the counters until my hands bled. Because when the world starts shifting, sweethearts, your first instinct isn't to fight. It's to cling to whatever's still standing. Clara knew. She came over one afternoon, the kids running wild in the yard, and she sat across from me with eyes like a storm cloud. He's hurting you, she said gently. No, I whispered, folding laundry. He's hurting himself. She didn't argue, just reached over, touched my hand, and said, don't disappear trying to hold him together. But I already had. Clara's words stayed with me like a splinter under the skin, not sharp enough to scream at, but too deep to ignore. Don't disappear trying to hold him together. I told myself I wasn't. I told myself I was just patient, loyal, steady, that I was doing what a good wife did, keeping the hearth warm, until he found his way back. But the truth was, I was already gone. You ever notice how a woman can vanish right in the middle of her own kitchen? I'd stand there in the evening, barefoot on cold linoleum, a baby on one hip, another tugging at my skirt, and still feel like a ghost passing through the room. Walter would come and go, always with a story, always with just enough charm to keep me quiet, but his eyes never lingered. His lips barely brushed my cheek. He'd murmur, thanks hun, over dinner, and disappear into sleep like a man who hadn't lived through the day beside me. One night, I found a charge slip tucked behind a photo in his wallet, from Lou's Lounge to Towns Over. The date matched a night he told me he was working late, and there, in smeared ballpoint ink, was the name, Marlene. Just that. No last name, no phone number, just Marlene. I stared at that slip for a long time, not angry, not even surprised. Tired, I didn't ask, not right away. I folded it neatly and slid it back where I found it. Then I went into the nursery, kissed both my babies on the forehead, and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall until the sun came up. You see, when betrayal first arrives, it doesn't knock the wind out of you. It doesn't shout, it whispers, it seeps. It walks beside you while you stir your coffee, while you braid your daughter's hair, while you fold your husband's undershirts and place them in the drawer like nothing has changed. But everything had changed. The final shift, the one that cracked something inside me for good, came on a Wednesday afternoon. I'd gone to the bank to deposit a small check from the church where I did part-time bookkeeping. Just a few dollars, but enough to cover groceries for the week. While I stood at the teller's window, the woman behind the glass, Brenda, a girl I went to school with, blinked at me, then said, "Oh Grace, I thought Walter said you were in Georgia." I blinked. Georgia. Yeah, he was in here just yesterday. Transferred money to a hotel in Savannah. Said you were down there visiting your cousin who just had surgery. I felt my mouth move, but no sound came out. I smiled or something close to it and said, "Oh, right, yes, I forgot he mentioned that." I walked out of that bank like my shoes were filled with cement. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I just kept walking, past the grocer, past the post office, past the flower shop where he used to buy me carnations back when he still remembered how. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the place where he usually tossed his keys. I waited for the sound of his truck. I waited for the excuses. I waited for a version of the truth I could live with. But he never came home that night or the next. No phone call, no note, just absence, sharp and loud and undeniable. I didn't tell the children. Evelyn was too little to understand, and James still thought the moon followed us home at night. I made dinner like always, sang lullabies like always, but inside, something had hollowed out. Clara came by on Friday. She took one look at me, still wearing Wednesday's dress, hair unbrushed, hands red from scrubbing the floors, and didn't say a word. She just sat down, took my hands in hers, and said, "Whatever you need, I'm here." And that's when I cried, not because I was sad, not even because I was angry, but because someone saw me, really saw me. I had spent so long being invisible, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be looked at and not looked through. That weekend, I found Walter's truck parked behind Lou's lounge. I didn't go inside. I didn't want to see him with her. I didn't want confirmation of what I already knew deep in my bones. Instead, I walked to the diner next door, ordered a slice of pie and a cup of coffee, and sat alone at the counter, letting the world move on around me. That's when I made a decision. Sweetheart, not out of strength, but out of survival. I would not beg him to stay, and I would not ask him why, because I already knew. I sat in that booth with the red leather peeling at the corners and stared out the smudged window, watching rain streak the glass like someone had taken a wet paintbrush to the world. The waitress called me hun, topped off my coffee twice, and slipped me a paper napkin without saying a word. I must have looked like something had been poured out of me, and maybe it had. I didn't go home right away. I wandered. I walked down roads I hadn't stepped on in years. The sidewalk behind the old high school, the lot where the drive-in used to be, the back fence of the baseball field where Walter kissed me that summer night, when we were still young and foolish and untouched by consequence. It was strange how the world hadn't changed, and yet everything in it felt unfamiliar. My life had narrowed down to this: 2 children, a silent house, and a man I could no longer pretend was mine. When I finally returned home, the porch light I'd left on was still burning. The children were with Clara, thank God. The kitchen was dark, the rooms hollow, and on the counter, where Walter always left his lunch pail, was nothing. That night, I sat on the floor with my knees tucked to my chest and listened to the old pipes groan in the walls. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed. Because sometimes, sweetheart, when everything falls away, all you have left is breath. The next morning, I packed up his things. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because I couldn't bear the sight of his jacket on the hook, or his boots by the door, or his shaving razor dull and waiting on the bathroom shelf, like he might return any minute and slice the silence back open. I placed everything into a cardboard box, folded, neat, clean, just like I had done for years. And I set it by the door. He came by that Sunday. He didn't knock, just walked in like he still belonged to something. The children ran to him. Evelyn leaped into his arms and James held his leg like a tree trunk. Walter looked at me, really looked, for the first time in months, and I think he saw it then. What he'd done. Grace, he said, voice cracking. I held up my hand. No, just that, one word. Enough. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't demand an explanation, because when a man breaks your heart slowly, he doesn't deserve the drama of your pain. He stayed in town, somewhere near Lou's, I suppose. We worked out visitation. He'd take the children every other weekend. They were too young to understand the full weight of what was happening, and I didn't burden them with it. I never spoke ill of him in front of them, but something in me, something essential, had gone quiet, and that quiet grew roots. In town, people started talking. They always do in places like ours. I'd hear the whispers at church, feel the eyes follow me in the grocery store. Poor Grace. She must have done something. He was such a good man. And I let them talk. I let them guess, and gossip and build their little stories, because the truth was too dull for their appetite. There was no affair with lipstick on collars, no shouting match in the yard, no suitcase thrown onto the lawn, just absence. That's what nobody understands. Sometimes the cruelest thing a person can do isn't hurt you outright, it's forget to keep loving you. The days turned into weeks. The children grew. I returned to work full-time. Clara watched them when she could. I learned how to change the oil in my car and snake the kitchen drain and file taxes without Walter's signature. And at night, after their tiny breaths steadied and the dishes were clean and the house fell into stillness, I sat and listened to the wind press against the windows. And I wondered if I'd ever feel whole again. But I survived. Not because I was brave, not because I was strong, but because I had no choice. Because someone had to keep the lights on. Someone had to remember the birthdays and cut the crust off the sandwiches and read the bedtime stories and keep pretending like nothing had shifted when, in truth, everything had. That was the real heartbreak. Sweetheart. Not losing Walter, but realizing I'd given the best of myself to someone who never even noticed when I disappeared. That it happened on a Thursday. Funny how the worst days never give you warning. They show up in plain clothes, ordinary as salt, and steal the air right out of your lungs. James had just turned 13. He was taller than me already, lanky with a mop of dark hair he never wanted trimmed, always smelling of old sneakers and pencil shavings. Evelyn was 11, quieter than she'd been as a child, already slipping into that distant space. Daughters go when the world begins to confuse them. I still made dinner every night, nothing fancy, just casseroles, soups, or sometimes eggs on toast when my legs ached and the groceries ran thin. We were doing all right, or at least I thought we were. That Thursday I came home from work late. The sun was already dipping behind the hills, and the house was oddly quiet when I stepped inside. No radio humming, no television blaring cartoons, just silence, sharp and expectant, like a held breath. Evelyn, I called out. James, no answer. My stomach dropped. I stepped into the kitchen. That's when I saw it, a half-packed suitcase on the floor, one of Walter's old army duffels, and beside it, Evelyn's pink raincoat, folded neatly like it was waiting to be chosen. My heart stuttered. I rushed to the bedroom, then the bathroom, then the backyard. Empty. I called Clara. Nothing. I called the school. No one had seen her since dismissal. My hands shook as I dialed Walter. Hello, he answered casually, like he wasn't holding my entire world in his hands. Is she with you? I asked, my voice raw. A pause, then a sigh. Yes, that one word, sweetheart. It felt like the ground opened up beneath me. I'm sorry, he said. She called, crying. She said, you yelled at her. I gripped the wall to stay upright. I told her she couldn't go to the dance until her grades improved. That's it, Walter. That's parenting. That's not cruelty. He said nothing. I heard Evelyn laughing in the background. Not cruelly, just freely. Like the kind of laugh you forget you once had. She doesn't feel safe with you right now, he added, quieter. I think it's best she stays here a few days. That's when I knew. He hadn't just taken her in. He was planning something. The next week, I received a notice in the mail. Petition for custody modification. Walter wanted Evelyn full-time. Said the house was unstable. That I was struggling. That he could provide more structure. Structure. From the man who once left without a word. From the man who taught his daughter to run instead of resolve. I sat at the kitchen table for hours. The letter spread before me like a death sentence. My tea went cold. The sun set. I didn't move. James came home, saw the paper, and asked what it meant. I lied, said it was something for work, because how could I tell my son that his father was trying to cut me in half? The next months were a blur of courtrooms and documents and forced smiles. I wore the same dress to every hearing. I couldn't afford a lawyer, so I did my best, hair pinned back, voice steady, heart cracking in silence. Walter arrived in a suit, his new wife beside him. Yes, sweetheart, new wife. He'd married her quietly. No announcement, no invitation, just a new Mrs. standing beside him with polished nails and a thin-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. She testified that Evelyn was thriving, that their home had healthy boundaries, that I seemed overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. The word hung in the air like smoke. They never said unfit. They didn't have to. They just painted the picture. A tired woman, aging alone, with late nights and thinning hair and a paycheck that barely covered groceries. They painted me into a corner. And the judge, he listened, nodded, scribbled. When the gavel fell, it wasn't full custody, but it might as well have been. Evelyn would stay with Walter during the week. I'd get weekends, 2 days, 48 hours. My baby girl, the one who once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to beg me to braid her hair before school, now belonged more to someone else. I smiled for her sake. I hugged her and whispered, "You'll always be mine." But when she turned away, her shoulders stiff, her eyes dry, I knew something had shifted permanently. And James, he grew angry, not at me, but at everything. At his father, at school, at the world. He started skipping class, mouthing off, hiding in the woods behind the house. I tried to reach him, but he was drifting. One night, I found him on the porch, cigarette trembling in his fingers, eyes full of unshed tears. "She chose him," he said, voice bitter. "No," I told him, wrapping my arms around his narrow frame. "She chose what felt easy." He didn't answer. I held him anyway. That winter was the loneliest of my life. The house was too quiet, Evelyn's room untouched, the hallway echoing every footstep. I'd find myself standing outside her door sometimes, hand on the knob, unable to go in. It felt like she'd died, not literally of course, but symbolically, and worse than that, sweetheart, was the thought that maybe, just maybe, she didn't miss me at all. I think the thing no one tells you, sweethearts, is that betrayal doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it's slow, quiet, even like a curtain pulled gently across a window. You don't realize how much light you've lost until you're sitting in the dark. And that winter, my home, once filled with clanging dishes and running feet and off-key humming, had become that darkness. James stopped talking. He'd come home from school, drop his backpack by the door, and disappear into his room. When I knocked, he'd say, "I'm tired." When I asked about school, he'd grunt. When I made his favorite stew, he barely touched it. Some nights, I'd hear him sneak out the back door. No yelling, no slamming, just the creak of the screen door and the soft crunch of gravel. I followed him once, barefoot, in my robe, clutching my coat against the cold. He went to the edge of the woods, where the old tire swing still hung, swaying in the wind. He sat under it and lit a cigarette, the glow of the ember the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. I didn't interrupt. I couldn't. That kind of grief, it hardens into something unrecognizable if you prod it too soon. Instead, I went back inside. I boiled water, I made tea, and I waited, but he never came to the table. Even on weekends when Evelyn was home, if you could still call it that, the tension was thick. She'd sit at the edge of her seat like she was counting the minutes, always on her phone, always texting someone. Once, I tried to braid her hair like I used to. She pulled away. "I'm not 5 anymore, Mom," she said. "I know," I replied, my fingers suddenly feeling old and useless. I missed doing it. She didn't look up from her phone. I cried in the laundry room that night. Silently, like women are taught to, over a basket of damp towels and mismatched socks. I bit down on my hand to keep from sobbing too loud. I didn't want James to hear. I didn't want Evelyn to hear. I didn't want anyone to know I was falling apart. But the cracks were spreading. In March, I got a call from the school. James had been caught with a flask in his locker. Just a few sips, they said, but enough. Enough to warrant suspension. Enough to raise eyebrows. Enough to confirm the whispers. "She's not coping well. She's overwhelmed. She's doing her best." But I showed up to the meeting wearing the same navy dress I'd worn to court. My shoes were scuffed, my lipstick to pink. I could feel them judging me, even when they smiled. James sat beside me, arms folded, jaw tight. "I'm sorry," I told them. "We've been going through a lot at home." They nodded sympathetically, condescendingly, and sent us on our way. In the car, James stared out the window. "Are you mad at me?" he asked finally, his voice small again. I reached over and placed my hand on his knee. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm mad at the world." He didn't say anything else. But when we got home, he sat with me while I made soup. It was the first time in months he hadn't disappeared behind his door. That night, we watched an old movie, something black and white, with corny music and exaggerated kisses. We didn't talk much, but I rested my hand on his shoulder, and he let it stay there. It felt like a tiny miracle. But miracles, I've learned, don't always stick. 2 weeks later, he was gone. not forever, but long enough to carve a new hole in my chest. He'd packed a backpack, just like his sister had, and vanished one morning before school. Left a note on the table. "Don't worry, I'm at Dad's." That was it. No, love you. No, I'll be back. Just a relocation, like I was a house he'd outgrown. I called Walter, of course, furious. Heartbroken, he said. I didn't know he was coming, but I can't turn him away. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive over and drag them both home, by the collar, but I didn't single quotes T. instead. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands folded, staring at the wall like it could give me answers. My babies, the 2 lives I'd built from nothing, who I'd fed and held and sung to in the dark, were gone, not to some faraway place, not to war or illness, but to the man who had left us behind. And they chose him. Or maybe they didn't choose. Maybe they just followed what felt easier. And I was the difficult one now. The tired one. The one who cried in the laundry room and forgot to buy peanut butter and sometimes snapped too. Quickly when the dishes piled up, I became the ghost in my own house, the one who left the porch light on even when no one came back. The one who set the table for one and pretended it didn't feel pathetic. The one who stood in the hallway, heart full of everything unsaid, while they all ate together in someone else's kitchen, someone else's life. There's a strange kind of ache that settles in your bones when the house goes silent. At first, you think it's just the quiet you're hearing, but it's not. It's the absence of proof that you still matter. No shoes by the door, no wrappers left on the counter, no beds unmade, no jackets dropped carelessly over the back of the couch, just neatness, stillness, the illusion of control where love used to live. I remember that first morning I woke up to an empty house, no Evelyn, no James, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, I didn't have anyone to make breakfast for. I stood at the stove anyway, just out of habit, cracked 2 eggs into the pan, toasted bread, even put the kettle on. Then I sat at the table, staring at the 2 plates I'd made, and I wept so hard I couldn't swallow a single bite. But here's the thing, my sweetheart's life doesn't wait for you to finish grieving. The laundry still piles up, the bills still come due, the weeds still grow between the cracks of the driveway. So I got up, I wiped the table, I threw away the uneaten eggs, and I went to work. Yes, I worked. A lot of people don't realize that. They assume I had some pension, some kind of nest egg tucked away. But no, Walter had drained half of what we'd saved during the divorce, and legal fees took the rest. I was 53 and starting over. I found a job at the small grocery store on Maple and 12th. Not glamorous, but decent enough hours. I worked in the deli, slicing cold cuts for people who never looked me in the eye. They'd order 3/4 of a pound of turkey and stare at their phones while I bled from a paper cut and tried not to cry over the sound of the slicer. Sometimes, I'd recognize mothers I used to talk to at school events. They'd glance at my apron, then back down, pretending they didn't see me. I got used to standing for 10 hours straight, to the burn in my heels, to the ache in my lower back. I started wearing 2 pairs of socks, just to make the shoes a little softer. One day, I saw Evelyn in the parking lot. She was laughing full-bodied, carefree, leaning against a shiny car I didn't recognize, beside a girl I didn't know. I froze. I didn't call out. I just stood there behind the window with mayonnaise on my knuckles and sweat pooling under my hairnet. She never looked inside. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid on the couch, not the bed. I couldn't face that room yet and stared at the ceiling until morning turned the living room pale. I kept going. I started meal prepping. For one, I cut my hair short, because I couldn't reach the back with the curling iron anymore. I learned to sew my own buttons. I canceled cable, sold the extra car, shoveled my own walk in winter, even when my knees ached like they were full of glass. And the mail kept coming, cards from distant cousins, junk flyers, and once, a letter from James. It wasn't long, just 4 lines. Mom, I'm okay, don't worry about me, sorry for how things went, I just needed air. No return address. But I held that letter like scripture, pressed it to my chest, slept with it on the nightstand like a lifeline. He was alive. He still called me Mom. That was enough to get me through another week, then another. Then another. At the store, they moved me to register. Said my smile made people feel calm. I found that funny, that I could be seen as a source of comfort while falling apart inside, but I took the shift. I needed the hours. A regular customer, A woman named Edna started bringing me fresh apples from her tree. "For your lunch," she'd say. I'd nod and thank her, even though my throat felt tight. It had been years since someone brought me anything without expecting something in return. Another woman, younger, probably mid-30s, came through my line every Saturday. Always bought the same thing: red wine, frozen spinach, vanilla, ice cream. One day, she asked, "You okay?" I blinked. "Why? You seem sad." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell her how the world had peeled itself open and poured out everything I loved. But instead, I just said, "I'm all right, sweetheart. Thank you for asking." She nodded, but the next Saturday, she added a bouquet of grocery store flowers to her cart and handed them to me at the end. "For you." I took them home, put them in the chipped vase by the sink. They lasted for days. I stared at them like they were holy. Eventually, I started volunteering at the church again. Not because I felt holy, I didn't. Not then, but because I needed something to keep my hands moving. I helped with the food pantry, folded clothes for the shelter, stirred giant pots of soup in the basement kitchen with other women who wore grief like perfume. We didn't talk about it much. We didn't have to. We knew the language of silence. And one day, as I was arranging canned goods by expiration date, the pastor stopped by. "You've been through it," he said softly. I nodded. He smiled. "But you didn't quit." No, I didn't. I might have shattered into 1,000 pieces. I might have begged the universe for a different ending. But I never stopped showing up. Not for the register, not for the pantry, not for the boy who left without hugging me goodbye. I kept the porch light on, every single night. Because that's what mothers do. Even when the world goes quiet. Even when they all eat together somewhere else. Even when you're standing alone in a hallway of your own making. We didn't talk about feelings back then. Not like folks do now. If something hurt, you swept it under the rug and kept moving. That was the way. But there was comfort in the routine, in the rhythm of rising early, working hard, eating together, praying before bed. The days blurred, but the love, that held fast. I remember the first time a boy passed me a note. A little folded square with "Do you like me?" and 2 boxers to check. I giggled for a whole week. I kept that note in a tin under my bed until I married, though I never married that boy. His name was Tommy something. He moved away during the summer and never said goodbye. It's strange, the things you remember. The way the soap smelled in Mama's laundry, the exact sound of Daddy's whistle coming up the walkway, the sting of Clara's braids snapping against my arm when we fought, and the way we always made up by nightfall. Back then, life felt small, but safe, like a circle drawn and chalked in, but whole. I didn't know the circle would break. I didn't know how much would change, but those were the days, when the table was always full, when no one stood in the hallway, when I believed, with all my heart, that I would always belong. I used to think the world stopped at the edge of Maple Lane, that if you went any farther than the county fairgrounds or the feed store, you'd fall right off the edge of the earth. We didn't travel. We didn't vacation. Our whole world was folded neatly into those few dusty streets where every porch swing told a story and every dog knew your name. After I turned 16, Mama said I was ready to work outside the home. Not forever, she told me, brushing the hem of my skirt smooth. Just long enough to know what it means to stand on your own feet. And so I did. I got a job at the Five and Dime on Main Street, sweeping aisles, restocking, sewing thread, and counting out change with trembling fingers. The store had creaky floors and a bell that rang when someone walked in. Sharp and tinny like a burr. My manager was Mr. Klein, an older man with thick eyebrows and a cigarette always pinched between his fingers. He was gruff, but fair. And in those slow hours after school, I learned how to fold linens just right, how to wrap a gift with brown paper and twine, and how to carry myself like a woman, not just a girl with good intentions. Sometimes I'd see Mama through the window, standing by the bus stop on Fridays. She'd wave and hold up a tin of her buttermilk cookies wrapped in wax paper. And though she never said it, I knew she was proud. Clara got married young, 18 and barefoot in our backyard with daisies in her hair and tears in her eyes. Her dress was borrowed, and her groom, Michael, was nervous as a colt. They didn't have much, but they were in love, and in those days, that was supposed to be enough. Me. I wasn't so quick to settle. I liked the way the world widened. When I walked through town in my work clothes, grown women calling me ma'am, little girls staring like I was someone they might become. I wasn't beautiful, but I was kind, and in a town like ours, Kindness had weight. That's when I met Walter. He came in one Saturday afternoon, asking about a record player needle. Tall, quiet, with a jacket slung over one shoulder and shoes, too clean to be from around here. Said he was just passing through to help his uncle with a roof job. He smiled at me not just with his mouth, but with his whole face, like he saw something in me I didn't even know I had. He bought the needle, a spool of blue thread, and a cherry soda from the cooler. And when he left, I watched him go, until the bell over the door stopped ringing. Something in my chest fluttered like a curtain in the wind. He came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. By the fourth week, he wasn't pretending anymore. I don't even need anything, he said, leaning on the counter. Just wanted to see if you'd smile at me again. I did. We courted slow. There were church picnics and walks by the river, and long talks on the porch where our knees barely touched. He'd bring me little things, a button carved from bone, a rose pressed in a book, a lemon drop wrapped in tissue. You're a soft place in a hard world, he told me once, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Mama was hesitant. You don't know his people, she whispered one night, kneading dough with her sleeves rolled up and flour dusting her elbows from away. That can mean something, Gracie. But Daddy just watched us together and nodded. Let the girl follow her heart. It's strong. It won't lead her wrong. I believed that. I believed Daddy. I believed Walter asked me to marry him on the front steps of the store after closing. It was raining, not hard, just enough to wet the air and soften the world. He held out a small gold ring, nothing fancy, just a plain band with a scratch on one side. It's not new, he said, but it's full of promise. And I said, yes. The wedding was quiet, just family, some neighbors, and old Miss Dottie playing hymns on the upright piano. Clara stood beside me, her second baby already swelling beneath her dress, and Mama cried through the whole ceremony. Walter kissed me like I was made of something breakable and brave at the same time. Afterward, we moved into a small upstairs apartment above a bakery. The whole place smelled like yeast and cinnamon. I'd wake to the sound of kneading and ovens below, and fall asleep to the rustle of Walter's breath beside me. Warm and steady. We were poor, yes, but happy. I kept working part-time while Walter found a job in construction. We had chipped plates and mismatched towels, but we had laughter. We had long talks and midnight dances in the kitchen. We played cards by candlelight when the power went out and read books out loud on the fire escape when the summer air was too thick to breathe. It was all so simple, so full. I look back now, and I don't recognize myself, that young woman so sure that love, once found, could hold through anything. That belief was my inheritance, my blessing, my blind spot. Because no one tells you, sweethearts, how love can change shape, how it can drift, shrink, harden, how people you build your life around can start turning their chairs away from the table, one small inch at a time, until you're standing in the hallway, holding a pie they never asked for. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Back then, we was still new, and I still believed that love was enough. It didn't happen all at once. You hear people talk like there's always one big moment, one loud snap when everything falls apart. But in my case, it came like a slow leak. You don't even notice it at first. You just start sleeping a little lighter, laughing a little less. The first crack was so small I nearly stepped over it. It started with Walter's hours. Construction was feast or famine, and that year, it was famine. He'd come home late, shoulders sagging, boots thick with mud, his spirit a little quieter than usual. They're cutting back, he'd say, or job fell through, or giving all the overtime to his nephew. I believed him. Of course I did. We were married. He was my person. You don't question the rain when your roof starts leaking. You just find a bucket and wait for the sky to clear. I picked up more shifts at the 5 and dime. I did ironing for the pastor's wife in the evenings. I clipped coupons until my fingers were ink-stained. I stretched ground beef into 4 meals and learned how to make soup out of bones and hope. But it wasn't just the money, it was the way he started. Looking through me, he'd eat his dinner with the radio on too loud. He'd answer questions with half shrugs. I'd ask him how his day was, and he'd say, same, without meeting my eyes. And when I tried to press, he'd sigh and rub his face like I was the problem. I'm tired, Grace, he said one night, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. I'm just tired all the time. I nodded. I rubbed his back. I brought him tea with honey. That's what you do when someone you love starts dimming. You light your own candle and hold it close to them, hoping they'll catch the spark. But sometimes they don't. Then came the lies. Little ones. At first, he'd say he was going to the hardware store, but I'd find the receipt from a bar on 3rd Street. Or he'd tell me he was working a Saturday shift, but come home smelling like tobacco and perfume, faint, almost forgettable, if I hadn't been trained to notice. Still, I made excuses. He's stressed, I told myself. He's lost his footing. This will pass. But when the baby came, it didn't pass. It got worse. I was 24 when I gave birth to our first, a little girl with Walter's eyes and my grandmother's stubborn chin. We named her Evelyn Rose, and, for a little while, she became the sun everything else orbited around. She cried loud and slept light. And I was bone-tired but full in a way I'd never been before. Walter held her with caution, like she might shatter. He wasn't unkind, just distant. He'd rock her when I asked. He'd smile for pictures, but he never stayed in the room long. Said the crying gave him a headache. Said he'd be more help once she could walk. And so I carried her in my arms, on my hip, in my heart, while I cooked and cleaned and stitched clothes from old curtains. I learned how to breastfeed with one hand while flipping pancakes with the other. I learned how to soothe the fever, and how to stifle my tears so she'd never see me break. The second baby came quicker, a boy this time. James Matthew, gentle, wide-eyed, with little fingers that curled around mine like he never wanted to let go. By then, Walter had started disappearing for whole nights. When I got home, back in that lonely little house with its peeling wallpaper and creaky kitchen floor, I sat at the dining table where I'd once fed my babies, and I opened the letter. In James's handwriting. Mom, if you're reading this, then Evelyn found the courage to show you. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. I was weak, and I let him use me. I wanted to make you proud, but I was too scared to stand between you and Dad. I hope one day you'll remember something good about me. If not, I understand. I held that letter until the sun rose, and I whispered, oh baby, I remember everything. The days after I returned from Evelyn's passed like pages in a book I didn't remember writing. Everything felt heavier. The sunlight didn't warm like it used to. My kitchen, once noisy with the clang of spoons and humming of radios, seemed to echo with ghosts. Even the clock ticked louder, like it knew something I didn't. I kept that letter from James on my bedside table, right next to my glasses, and the little cedar box where I'd saved locks of my children's hair from their first haircuts. And, each morning, I'd reach out and touch it with trembling fingers before getting out of bed. I didn't know what to do. For a time, I just existed. I'd walk the block each morning like I used to, nodding politely to the neighbors. I'd sweep the front porch, feed the birds, knit a little while the sun moved across the floor. But everything was different, because now I knew, and knowing changes things, sweethearts, in ways that can't always be undone. For months, I didn't tell a soul. I didn't confront James. I didn't call Evelyn. I didn't even pray. I just carried it. But carrying a truth like that, it wears you down, like dragging a sack of wet stones behind you day and night. The first breaking point came one Sunday morning, in the middle of church. I'd been going to St. Agnes every week since I was 19. I knew the hymns by heart, could smell when Mrs. Callahan's perfume had changed, could feel when the pews got new polish. But that morning, sitting beneath the stained glass window of Mary cradling baby Jesus, I cracked. The choir was singing softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, and when they reached the line, come home, the who are weary, come home, I started crying. Not polite tears either, not the kind you dab with the tissue and smile through. These were the deep kind, the kind that make your whole body shake, the kind that remind you of every time you told yourself, I'm fine, when you weren't. I covered my mouth with my shawl, stood up, and nearly ran down the aisle. Outside, I sat on the cold stone steps, head in my hands, and for the first time in decades, I prayed like I meant it. What do I do now? I whispered, God, what do I do with all of this? And then, I swear to you, sweethearts, it was like a whisper in my chest. To tell the truth, not for vengeance, not for pity, but because silence had never saved me before, and it wasn't going to start now. That week, I invited James to dinner. It had been nearly a year since we'd last sat across the same table. The visits had grown sparse, awkward. He'd call on holidays, send a gift card for my birthday, but the closeness we once shared, back when he was just a boy asking me to read him one more bedtime story, that had vanished long ago. He showed up late, carrying a bottle of cheap red wine, and that same nervous smile I'd seen since he was 12 and trying to hide a broken window. "Sorry, I'm late, Mom," he said, hugging me too quickly. I served chicken and green beans, his favorite, and we ate mostly in silence. I watched him chew, watched him glance at the pictures still on my walls. I could tell something was ticking in him, too. When the plates were cleared and the tea was steeping, I placed the shoebox on the table between us. His hand froze around his mug. "I went to see Evelyn," I said softly. He didn't say a word. I saw the letters, I listened to the tape. Still, no words, but his eyes, oh sweethearts, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. Shame. I reached out and gently laid my hand over his. "I know, James." He closed his eyes. A long silence stretched between us, heavy, trembling. I was scared. He finally whispered, "Dad told me you'd take everything, that he'd be left with nothing. He said you'd already ruined him." I nodded slowly. "And did I, James, did I ruin him?" He didn't answer. I leaned back. "Your father was many things, but ruined, no. He built that ruin himself, brick by brick." He covered his face with both hands. "I was so stupid, Mom." "No," I said gently. "You were young. You were lied to, and I forgave you a long time ago, even before I knew what I was forgiving." He looked at me then, really looked, and something cracked in him. Like a dam holding back a flood. He sobbed hard, and I let him. I walked around the table, knelt beside him, and held my son as he cried like the boy I once rocked to sleep in the middle of a thunderstorm. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I wanted to fix it, but I didn't know how." "I know," I whispered into his shirt. "I know, sweetheart. That night didn't solve everything. Life doesn't wrap up in bows like that, but it was the first honest night we'd shared in decades. And from that place, that raw, messy, painful place, we began to rebuild that together. Not as a perfect family, but as people learning how to be human again." The years after that, dinner with James weren't easy, but they had a rhythm, a new kind of quiet understanding that hadn't existed before. We didn't speak of the tapes or the letters again. There was no grand apology tour, no family meeting where we laid it all out and cried on each other's shoulders. That's not how my family worked. That's not how most families work, I suppose. Not the ones stitched together with old pain and unspoken things. But there were new gestures. James started coming around more, sometimes just to bring soup or trim the hedges, sometimes to sit on the porch and tell me about his work, about the grandchildren I hardly knew. He even called me Mom again, not that strained, obligatory hey, but a soft, familiar mom, like he remembered who I was. Still, I didn't trust it entirely. I couldn't, because there's something strange that happens when you've lived through betrayal. Even kindness feels like a setup, even love feels suspicious. But I smiled, I hugged him back, and I told myself that was enough. Then came Evelyn's funeral. Cancer took her. Swift and mean. I got the call from her sister. She said she thought I ought to know. That was kind of her. No one owed me that, least of all them. I didn't go to the service. I didn't think it was my place, but I sent lilies, white ones, with a note that read, "Peace at last." I thought that would be the end of it, but, as you've learned by now, my sweethearts, the past has a way of knocking twice. A week after the funeral, James called. "Mom," he said, voice thick, "I need to bring you something from Evelyn." I didn't ask questions. I just told him to come. He arrived late, after the sun had gone down, holding a small manila envelope and looking like he'd aged 10 years in 7 days. "She left this for you," he said, placing it on the table. "She told me, if you were still alive after she was gone, I had to give it to you, no matter what." I didn't touch it at first. I just stared. "She told me she wanted to explain," he added softly. In her own words, he left without staying for tea. That's how I knew it was serious. When I finally opened the envelope, there was a letter and a photograph. The letter was written in Evelyn's cursive, sharp, elegant, the kind of handwriting they don't teach anymore. It smelled faintly of lavender, and it began like this: "Grace, I was always jealous of you. Not because you were beautiful, though you were. Not because he married you first, though he did, but because you had something I never could. His loyalty." I sat back, breath caught in my throat. Her words poured out, raw and unedited. She spoke of how their affair began, how my husband had lied to her, too, told her I was cold, cruel, uninterested, that I'd trapped him with children, that he stayed with me out of pity. She believed him, she wrote, because she wanted to. But what gutted me was this. I thought I'd won Grace, but he never stopped talking about you. Even in our quietest moments, it was always your mother would have done it this way. Or Grace used to say, you haunted our marriage, you were the ghost in our bed. She told me how bitter she became, how she turned James against me not just because she wanted to, but because she needed to believe I deserved it. I'm sorry, she wrote, not just for what I did, but for what I didn't see. You weren't the villain. You were the one left holding all the pieces. And then the photo it was of James, at maybe 10 or 11, standing in front of my old kitchen window, grinning with jelly on his cheek, and me blurry in the background, reaching out toward him. On the back, she'd written, he was always yours. I sat with that letter all night. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat. You'd think a revelation like that would bring closure, wouldn't you? But closure isn't a door slamming shut. It's a hallway, a long, quiet hallway. At Thanksgiving, James invited me to dinner, said he wanted me there, that the grandkids had asked about me, that it was time. I almost didn't go, but something in Evelyn's letter had changed me. She'd spent her whole life trying to win a man who couldn't be one. I didn't want to spend the rest of mine haunting a room I was never invited into. So, I put on my nicest cardigan, made a pumpkin pie from scratch, and walked up their front steps like a woman who still had something to give. The door opened, James hugged me tight, called me Mom, said come on in, and I stepped inside. But, sweethearts, here's the part I've never told anyone, here's the part that still stings, even now. I brought that pie into the kitchen, set it down on the counter, and then I saw it through the open archway into the dining room. They were all already seated, James at the head, the grandkids on either side, their plates full, their hands already reaching for rolls and gravy boats. No one looked up. No one noticed me standing there, not even James. They were already eating, already laughing, already together, and I stood in the hallway, pie in hand, heart in pieces, watching, just watching. It wasn't cruelty, it wasn't intentional, but that's what made it worse. I realized then, they had built a world that didn't need me in it, not out of spite, just out of habit. I didn't go in, I didn't interrupt. I placed the pie gently on the table, turned around, and walked back out into the cold November air. The sound of their laughter followed me to the street. That was the real truth, not what Evelyn confessed, not what James had hidden, but this. Sometimes, reconciliation is just a word. Sometimes, love doesn't look the way you hoped it would, and sometimes, the hallway is where you stay. James answered on the third ring. Mom. His voice was groggy. It was early. I'd called before the sun had cleared the rooftops. I imagined him sitting in his kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his hand already reaching for the coffee machine out of habit. I'm not angry, I said, before he could say another word. He was quiet. I could feel him listening, holding his breath like a child, afraid of what might come next. I need you to know that okay, he said softly. I've been angry before, James, but that's not what this is. Then what is it? I swallowed. My hand was shaking slightly, so I pressed it against the table to still it. The light was beginning to slip through the blinds in golden slants, catching on the steam rising from my tea. It's me letting go, I said. A silence stretched between us, not cold, just stunned. I'm tired, sweetheart, tired of carrying around a version of a family that no longer exists. I didn't mean for it to be like this, he said quietly. I know you didn't, but meaning doesn't erase what happened. Another pause. Then, are you coming to Thanksgiving? There it was. The olive branch. The question that had hovered between us for years, wrapped in cranberry sauce and polite smiles. No, I said, not unkindly. I think I'll stay home this year. I might visit your Aunt Ruth, or take a trip. There's a bus that goes to Savannah. Always wanted to see the Spanish moss. You're always welcome here, Mom, he offered, but it came out small, like a boy rehearsing a line given to him. I know, I said gently, and that's enough. I hung up and sat in the quiet for a while. The house felt different, not empty, but spacious, like I'd finally moved the furniture of my heart to let the light in. That afternoon, I took down some of the old photos from the hallway, not all of them, just the ones that didn't make me smile anymore. I packed away the one from James's wedding. The one where I stood off to the side, holding my purse, cropped halfway by the frame. Instead, I put up a photo of me and my sister Evelyn from 1963, laughing barefoot in a riverbed with our skirts hiked up and sunburn on our noses. We'd just stolen peaches from Old Man Tucker's tree that day. I stared at that picture for a long time. You see, sweethearts, we often spend our lives thinking that our most powerful moments come from confrontation, from shouting the truth, or demanding to be heard. But sometimes, the most radical thing a person can do is simply stop waiting to walk away, not out of bitterness, but because you've realized your worth isn't tied to their apology. I did go on that bus trip. You know, Savannah was beautiful, warm, dreamlike. I sat on a bench under the moss-draped oaks and watched strangers pass, lovers, mothers, old men with dogs. No one knew me. No one expected anything. It was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that healed, not haunted. One evening, I found a little shop by the river that sold hand-bound journals. I bought one with a green leather cover and gold-edged pages. That night, in the dim light of my hotel, I opened to the first page and wrote, "Today, I forgave myself for staying in the hallway too long. Tomorrow, I'll build a room of my own. But I suppose, my dears, there's one last thing I haven't told you. Not because I wanted to keep it from you, but because I only understood it myself recently. You see, all those years I stood in the hallway, watching them laugh, serve plates, pass mashed potatoes hand to hand. I told myself I was excluded, unwanted, invisible. But the truth that came to me under the Savannah sky, in the hush of live oaks and memory, is this. Maybe they didn't close the door. Maybe I just never opened it. Maybe grief had built a wall so thick around me that I couldn't hear their voices when they called. Maybe I mistook their hesitation for rejection. Maybe I was so afraid of being hurt again that I never truly knocked. That's the twist, sweethearts. The hallway wasn't locked. I just didn't have the heart to walk in. Not then. And maybe they didn't have the courage to pull me through. But now I understand. And with that understanding comes peace. And with that understanding comes peace. But don't let me fool you, sweethearts. Peace isn't a burst of light or a trumpet sounding in the sky. It's not something you stumble on like a lost earring beneath the dresser. Peace, I found, is quieter than silence. It's a single breath taken without dread. That next morning, I walked into my kitchen and, for the first time in years, I made breakfast just for me. Not a cup of tea and stale toast, but real breakfast: eggs, scrambled in butter, toast browned just so, slices of peach from the jar I'd saved for something special. I set a single place at the table, cloth napkin, little daisy vase, no phone buzzing beside me, no sounds from the television. Just me, the woman I'd left waiting all these years. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but instead, I smiled. It was crooked, a little rusty, but it was real, like a door swinging open in an old house. Because here's the truth, I wish someone had told me when I was younger. You don't have to be included to belong to yourself. You don't have to be remembered to remember who you are. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't something you give to them. It's something you give to yourself. Like cool water after a long walk in the sun. Later that week, I did something that might sound silly to you. I went out and bought a second dining chair. Not because I expected company, but because I realized something. Sitting at that lonely little table with the sun pouring through the windows, I'd gotten used to being half of something, half a mother. Half invited, half healed, but not anymore. That second chair, it was a promise. To me. To the woman who stood in kitchens making pies no one ate. To the girl who danced barefoot in riverbeds and dreamed of more. To the grandmother, yes, me, who finally learned that the hallway isn't where life happens. The hallway is just the in-between, the waiting room. You don't have to stay there forever, so I bought the chair. And every now and then, I sit across from it, light a candle, and I talk. To Evelyn. To Frank. To the pieces of my life that once felt lost. And I tell them, look, I'm still here now. I won't pretend everything's perfect. James still forgets to call. Claire sends photos of the children, but not much else. I get invited to birthdays sometimes. Not always. But I stopped measuring my worth by the number of invitations on the fridge. I started measuring it by how full my own days feel. And let me tell you, sweethearts, they're full in a quiet way. the kind of full that doesn't spill over, but settles deep in your bones. I take walks, I bake again, not to impress anyone, but because I love the way cinnamon smells when it hits hot butter. I joined a library group for women my age. We don't always finish the books, but we always bring dessert. And sometimes, when the weather is just right, I drive out to Willow's Bend, sit on that old bench, and whisper thank you to the wind. Because every chapter, even the ones filled with silence and aching, led me here. Let me tell you one more thing before we go. My sweethearts, I had a dream recently. In it, I was back in the hallway. Same wallpaper, same framed photographs crooked on the walls. I could hear laughter spilling from the dining room, the clinking of silverware, the scrape of chairs. But this time, I didn't freeze. I reached for the knob, I opened the door. And when I stepped inside, there was no table, no feast, no family, just a room filled with mirrors, and in every one, I saw myself at different ages, young and frightened, middle-aged and fierce, old and gentle, and they all smiled at me, like they'd been waiting. I woke up crying, not from sadness, from recognition, from finally seeing myself not as the forgotten one, but as the thread that held the whole thing together. I don't know what your hallway looks like, my dears. Maybe it's a family that never truly understood you. Maybe it's a love that slipped away. Maybe it's the life you almost lived, the child you almost had, the apology that never came. But whatever it is, hear me now. You don't have to stay in that hallway, even if the door never opens, even if no one comes looking for you. You can leave. You can build something new, even with the broken pieces. You can set your own table, and you can be full, not because they handed you a plate, but because you learned how to feed yourself again. And so, sweethearts, if you've listened this far, thank you. Truly. From the deepest part of this old heart, thank you for walking this road with me. Now tell me in the comments, if you'd be so kind, what hallway have you been standing in? What door are you ready to walk through? And if this story touched you, even a little, like this video, subscribe, share it with someone who's still waiting to be seen, because stories like this, they deserve to live on, like pie crust and peaches, like mothers and daughters, like healing, slow, quiet, but real. Until next time, my loves. Funny thing, sweethearts, some stories don't end with big conclusions or sweeping gestures, no final speeches, no doors flung open. Sometimes, the story just slows down, quietly, like a song that fades rather than finishes. And in that quiet, you start to see things clearer. For years, I told myself I was forgotten, that I gave, and they never saw me. That every holiday I cooked through aching knees, and every birthday I remembered while mine slipped by. All of it meant nothing to them. But looking back now, really looking, I realize some things don't shout their love, they whisper it. They fold it into small things. A recipe passed down, a child's middle name, a photo tucked in a wallet for too many years, and I missed some of those whispers, wrapped up as I was in the noise of my hurt. That hallway I stood in, it wasn't just made of drywall and shadows. It was built from years of silences I didn't know how to fill, moments I misread, and the ache of wanting to be needed again. But here's what I've learned. Waiting for someone to bring you in isn't the same as belonging. Sometimes you've got to belong to yourself first. A few weeks ago, I took down the last of the photographs in that hallway, not out of anger, not to erase them, but to make space for something new. I put up a picture of myself instead, not young, not done up for a party, but one someone took when I wasn't looking. I was in the garden, dirt on my hands, hair wild, smiling at something only I could see, and I thought, that woman, she made it. She loved hard, she got left behind, and she kept going anyway. That smile was real. There's something I haven't told you. When I finally went to Savannah, I stayed in a little inn by the marsh. The mornings were quiet, warm. I'd sit with my tea on the porch, and watch the sun stretch over the water like it had all the time in the world. And one morning, just before I left, the innkeeper, a woman, maybe 50 or so, kind-eyed and curious, asked what brought me there. I told her, I came to find the parts of me I'd forgotten to love. She looked at me for a long moment, then she smiled and said, well, you picked the right place, and I think I did. Sweethearts, if you take anything from this long, aching story, let it be this. Don't wait in hallways where your name is never called. Don't tie your worth to empty chairs, and don't let grief turn you into a ghost in your own life. Make your own table, even if it's just one chair, one plate, one cup of tea, Let it be yours. Fill it with laughter that doesn't need permission. Light a candle for the girl you once were. Set a place for the woman you're becoming. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to stop explaining your pain to people who never learned how to hear it. Before I go, I want to thank you, sweethearts. Truly, if you stayed with me through all of this, through the pie in the hallway, the quiet Thanksgivings, the cracked photo frames, the years of trying and waiting and wondering, thank you. Thank you for sitting beside me, even if only through a screen. These stories, they ache, don't they? But they deserve to live. So if you listened to the whole story, my sweethearts, thank you. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have knocked on the door? Would you have walked away? Or would you, like me, have waited a little too long, but still found your way back to yourself? And don't forget to like and subscribe, my dear. Stories like this, the quiet, aching ones, they deserve to be remembered, just like we do.